Welcome and thank you all for sharing this space with us today in the inaugural Asian Artists in discussion. My name is Elaine Lee. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a proud Taiwanese American and the orchestra librarian at the Curtis Institute of Music. We have an amazing group of AAPI excellence here with us today, and so many thanks already to Helen, Juliette, Najib, and Viet for being on board to share your thoughts with us today, and Danny and Lourdes for organizing this conversation with me. Thank you to Amanda Lynn Bottoms and Aaron Crouch for their amazing broadcast conversations last summer, which inspired us to form this one following the horrific hate crime in Atlanta, where 8 people were murdered, 6 of whom were Asian women, during a time of increased aggression towards the AAPI community. We had wished to include a wide representation of experiences, but many people were unfortunately not available today. So hopefully those perspectives are represented in a later conversation. Watching the subsequent pain and grief of our community being erased in real time in the aftermath of the Atlanta murders emphasized the urgent need for us to reconnect with our own communities, start speaking out, and continue strengthening our solidarity with other communities which have also been unfairly marginalized. Our stories have been pushed aside and ignored for so long, and we hope that this conversation today will help our community, especially our young AAPI artists with us today, feel less invisible and alone. Our existence in music is taken for granted that because we are seen on stage or backstage means we are okay. But we all know that there is much more that we contend with before we reach a stage. And we hope to explore some of that today to illuminate the common ground on which we stand through shared experiences and to ask where we can go from here. We're going to begin with a couple acknowledgements and then move into introductions. So we acknowledge that we reside on lands stolen from Indigenous people by ethnic cleansing, genocide, and forced removal. These are still Indigenous lands, will always be Indigenous lands, and we commit to recognizing, uplifting, and celebrating Indigenous heritage. For learning more information, please visit nativegov.org and nativeland.ca, which you can see the links to up there. We acknowledge that this is a time of heightened grief and trauma, that this conversation may become heavy and uncover past pain, so please practice self-care and step away as you need. We acknowledge the grief and pain of our Sikh brothers and sisters are currently experiencing following the murders in Indianapolis, and we affirm our solidarity with them. We recognize the moment of justice that played out in yesterday's verdict and that there is still so much work to be done. It is a small moment of healing, and we continue to stand in solidarity with our Black brothers and sisters who are once again publicly wrestling with the horror and terror of police violence as we mourn the loss of Ma'Khia Bryant. We hear you, we see you, and we stand with you. We ask that everyone viewing and participating in the conversation here and in the social media chats commit to engaging with respect and openness. Please feel free to ask questions in the YouTube and Facebook chats during the conversation. We'll be answering a few of them at the end. Now we'll go to Danny for introductions. Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see this distinguished panel of people and friends. And also thank you all for tuning in. First and foremost, I want to say a special thank you to Elaine here today. She really spearheaded this whole thing. I was very moved when she reached out and said, "What can we do right now?" She's the reason behind these discussions to begin with. So I'm going to ask everyone here today if we can please state your name, your preferred pronouns, a little bit about yourself. That would be great. And then you'll select the next person to introduce themselves. And I was asked to start out. So sorry to start with me, but my name is Daniel Matsukawa. Many people call me Danny, friends. So all of you may call me Danny, of course. And my preferred personal pronoun is he, him. And a little bit about myself, I was born in Argentina and to Japanese parents, and I grew up in New York from the age of 3. So my joke is always like, it's always fun during the Olympics who I get to root for, because I consider myself more of a worldly child. In general, I'll just say very quickly, it's like I really do see myself, and it resonates to really be American. So I just want to start out that way. So, all right, Juliette, you're on.
Hi, I'm Juliette, and I'd like to say thank you for having me here. This feels like a very welcoming, warm, and open space to be in. My preferred pronouns are she and her, and I am originally from Canada, Edmonton, Western Canada. My parents emigrated from Korea in the 60s before I was born, and I have lived in the United States in the East Coast since I was 10 years old. So I do feel like a very good representative of migration to America, of looking for opportunity and having a country welcome me. And I'm a violinist. I am the first associate concertmaster of the Philadelphia Orchestra, where I've been serving in that position for, I think, 16 years. And I would like to ask Najib to introduce himself.
Thank you. And Elaine, thank you for asking me to be here. I look up to everyone here that's present right now. So you're all my inspiration. So I'm so honored to be here. My name is Najib Wong. My pronouns are he, him. And I am the director of the PMAY Artist Initiative, which is a musical pathway program for students who are underrepresented in classical music. And I was originally born in Singapore of Chinese and Malay heritage. And I came here, for college, for music. And I've been here for almost 20 years. And, people, same thing, ask me like, how do I feel about being here? And I always found that, America, I very closely am attached to the beliefs of the American people, and I think that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. How about Helen?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Elaine, for including me in this. My name is Helen Gerhold, and my pronouns are she, her. And I am actually half Chinese. I know it may not look like it. My mom is from Shanghai and came here to study and get her PhD, and that's where she and my white father met. And my father is German and Irish, so that's my lineage. I am a harpist, and then I also run a nonprofit called the Lyra Society that brings harps, harp lessons, harp presentations, and college and financial aid counseling at no cost to Philadelphia students. And I'm executive director at that organization. And I can't wait to speak more about everything that's coming up, and I'm just really excited to be here. So thank you so much. I'll call upon Viet then.
Hi, everyone. Yes, thanks for having me as well. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a composer currently living in Atlanta. My parents immigrated here decades ago from Vietnam, and I was born in California 30 years ago, and grew up here in Georgia, actually, and studied music for a long time. And so it's cool to be back kind of in my hometown. And I will call on Lourdes now.
Great, thank you, Viet. And special thank you to Elaine and Danny for being colleagues in sharing and planning in this afternoon. So it's delightful to be with everyone. I'll do some introductions and then we'll launch into a few questions so we can think about and talk through some ideas. My introduction, so my pronouns are she and her. My mother was born in the Philippines, in Manila, the Philippines, and she immigrated to the United States, to Chicago actually, and brought the rest of her siblings to the Chicago area as well. She met my father, who was a tall Caucasian man. He passed away, but his father immigrated from Greece, and so I grew up in a very mixed race household in Chicago, and I lived there until my college years had finished for 20 plus years. I live outside Philadelphia now, and we had really kind of I think of it as a culture shock in our house, where As my mother's sisters, one by one, would arrive in Chicago, our family gatherings got larger and larger over the years. They eventually would marry and have children. And, our family gatherings today, most of them are still in Chicago, are almost 100 people where they used to be about, 15 or 20. So it's really a delight to think about really the mashup of cultures. We base our celebrations around Filipino traditions. And that's the culture that we really identify with, and I do as well. My professional background, I currently am the executive director of Astral Artists, which is also in Philadelphia, like everyone here, for the most part. Astral is a wonderful place. I've been there for a few months, and similar to PMAY organization, we also focus on working with emerging classical musicians and really providing support to them as they navigate their careers and step into the world that we know well as classical music, arts and culture, the creative sector, however we want to refer to it these days. So with that, it's an honor to be with all of you guys here, my good friends and dear colleagues. But I'll launch into some questions and get us started. The first one, I think, before we really kind of get into some depth, although the first question, I invite everyone to please share deeply if you'd like. Just let's do a check-in with each other. How is everybody doing? How are each of you feeling at this particular moment? Whether it's today, whether it's this afternoon, whether it's this year, I invite you guys to share. How are you feeling right now? How are we all doing?
If I may, I think I would sum up my feelings as frustrated optimism. And I was so moved and touched by the verdict yesterday. But at the end of the day, the fact that it happened is still so fresh and traumatic for a country, for all of us here. And tying it in to, as we return to a new normal out of the pandemic, a better normal, and seeing that ride being bumpy and slow, it just kind of feels like every progress that the country makes and is always bumpy and slow. So, but I do feel at the end of the day optimistic. These kinds of conversations are definitely a part of that.
That's great, Juliette. Thank you for sharing. For sure, it is a challenging moment for all of us. Anyone else want to share how you're feeling today?
That was beautifully said, Juliette. I couldn't agree with you more, and just in terms of that very, really equally mixed feelings. This feelings of feeling you're sad, but you're also relieved. I mean, from yesterday's verdict, it took the world to see what was happening with George Floyd, and a year long of protest, and other police chiefs and policemen to testify against this person for justice to be served. And why does it need to take so much just for this to happen? And of course, the question really is, why does this have to happen to begin with? And so much of this is so important. I was moved today just immediately by hearing each one of your stories. And it just reminded me even more, everyone has a story. All these Black lives have a story. All these Asian lives have a story. Every one of us have a story. And it's so beautiful. And I feel like it was just so very powerful for me to see this and hear this. And it's a great human reminder.
Indeed. Well said, Danny. Thank you for highlighting that. Najib, did you want to contribute?
Yeah, I was, of course I agree. At first all these events happened, and I remember it's been a year since, that George Floyd, and it's been weeks now since Atlanta. And every time something happens like that, something physical happens to me, and I get so tight somehow. And, it takes, a mental, but also a physical toll on you. And and my instinct as, as an Asian person is always, my parents would always say, like, keep your head down, and, others have it worse than you, right? Don't stand out. And these are like unconscious rhetoric. And, but I think it feels different this time because I see a lot of people just come forward. And there's been an influx of people sharing about their experiences. And we're seeing so much more diversity from the Black community, but also the Asian community, where we're recognizing the diversity within our Asianness, right? And there's so many movements now coming out. So I'm also very optimistic about what's coming up next.
That's great, Najib. Thank you. I would just add the familiarity that you mentioned about your parents. My mother would always, kind of encourage us not to rock the boat, just literally, like as you described, kind of keep your head down and just get to work. Like we're so glad to be here. We have a better, future ahead of us. So don't shake things up. And I think that's also a reason that it's so meaningful for me to be here and shake it up a little bit with you guys, in this format, in this forum. So thank you for that, Najib. Anyone else want to share how you're feeling? Great. So let's jump in. Other things let's just get into this. So, and I love this question because it's specific to what we do in classical music. We really do serve. I like to think we serve and devote our lives to classical music. We certainly have been in it for decades now at this point. So the question is really, how do the two go together? I'm interested in thoughts from everyone. What are some ways that your cultural background has informed your work in classical music? I'll continue the second part of the question, which is, are there areas of your cultural background that you would like to explore further so that it more influences your work? Interested to hear from you guys on this.
I can start.
Thanks. Yeah, Viet.
Yeah, so as a composer, it's kind of a thing that comes up a lot, where when people see my name on a program or they see my headshot, I think they have an expectation of what my music will sound like. And like, I don't have the kind of privilege of just being like a neutral blank canvas as a composer in terms of my identity. And so I think sometimes people, when they hear my music, they are maybe surprised or something, like, oh, he sounds like an American composer. And the truth is, I am an American composer. And that's kind of my mission, or one of my missions with my career, my music, is to show everyone that an American composer can be named Viet Cuong and can look like me. And I mean, it's happened more times than I care to admit after a concert or a premiere where I go up and I speak about my piece, and it's my bio is in the program note. And then people ask me afterwards much longer I'll be in the States for, or did I come all the way here just for this concert? And I think it's kind of a unique sort of situation that happens with a lot of Asian Americans, is that we're like, people assume that we aren't from here. I'm sure like many of us here have been asked before, like, so where are you from? And I say, oh, I grew up in Georgia. It's always like the next, like, I know it's coming, like, but where are you from? And so now I just say, like, my parents came here from Vietnam and I grew up in Georgia, and kind of cover both bases. But in terms of like how being a Vietnamese American affects my music, I wouldn't say like so far that I have, written music inspired by Vietnamese instruments or traditional folk music or anything like that. For me, it's actually deeper, because my music has a certain level of irreverence, I think, in terms of like the broader classical music, composer community. I have a certain level of irreverence, or kind of like, just, I do what I want in my music, kind of just honestly from myself, without much caring much about like what other composers might think or something. And I think that has to do with when I grew up, I felt like kind of like a freak. I grew up here in Georgia. I was one of the like only Vietnamese kids at my school. So even through college, like I was one of the only people who kind of wrote music that sounded like mine. And it was just kind of like, well, you know, if I've survived this long without fitting in, like I can keep doing that and just be me. So it goes deeper than just like quoting a Vietnamese folk tune. It's like the essence of my music is me showing who I am and how I'm unique. And that took a long time to kind of accept, you know. When I was a kid, I wanted to blend in at all costs. And that was like, we've mentioned before, like kind of maybe a generational thing, or like especially my mom, when she came here after the fall of Saigon, she had nothing. And to survive, it was all about assimilation. It was about blending in at all costs and showing that you can't assimilate, you are an American. And she did well for herself and worked so hard so that my brother and I could, you know, live our dreams, so I could be a composer one day, basically. But then it comes with like the cost of, you know, with your kids feeling like, oh, I really had to blend, even though it's like kind of impossible at the end of the day if you aren't white, where I grew up. So yeah, but I do plan to explore my roots more. I feel like I'm ready for it now, and I've written some music that uses Vietnamese as a text, and it still felt honest to me. It's like I had to like wait a while for it to feel ready for that.
That's wonderful, Viet. Thank you for sharing so much in there. It is so familiar for me, and I'm sure for many of those who are watching and listening in for us today. Just so many similarities in what you said. I don't want to go back because you eloquently said it so beautifully. But I invite others to share about your cultural background and how has it informed your practice, our practice of classical music. Juliette, yeah.
Now I just wish we could hear some of your music right now, because what you said makes it sound so compelling. But yeah, we've all been asked, right? Where are you from? No, where are you really from? And after many kind of snippy ways of answering that, and then dismissive ways, I've come to the point of like taking it at as an expression more of what's our point of connection, what is interesting about you, or you know, just really trying to be the most gracious and face value kind of interpretation of that remark. Where are you from? And I just, you know, open my mouth and basically say who I am now. You know, I'm from Edmonton, but my parents are from Korea. That's what you really wanted to know. But you know, I was born there. I speak English. Thank you very much, etc. But you know, I too was Canada, Edmonton, very multicultural place. But in school, I think I was one of the few Asian kids in my school, and having a vast community of Asian Americans in classical music and finding that sort of different community and sort of, you know, having multiple lives, multiple like school life and music life and family life and all those things. And I think that being Asian, being more externally different from the, you know, the white normative, just kind of gave me more tools to sort of switch between like where I was, what my spaces were, what my given community was at that time. And, you know, for me as a violinist, like most of us, I started when I was 4 and it got really intense. So in a way, if I had to choose who I am, first of all, I'm a musician, like beyond anything else, beyond being a girl or, you know, or a Canadian or anything. I'm you know, at heart of it, where I find where my people are, my peeps are the people who play that, you know, E string. So that's what I feel like music gave me, and what I don't know what I brought to it necessarily, but in terms of the culture and the identity, yeah, that's been one of the gifts of music.
Thank you, Juliette. It's a gift to hear you describe it that way as well. Any other thoughts around the connection of your cultural background and experience and how it informs your practice? If not, oh, Najib, please.
Yeah, I was going to share a little bit. And, nowadays, if someone asks me like where I'm from, I answer and I ask them like, where are you from? And where are you really from? Because everyone's from somewhere else, right? And, who gets to say that you belong here? I think we all belong here. I think we all belong here because we, hold the values of this country close to ourselves, right? I think we believe the same things, and that should, that I think that's, something that I hold to be true, for everybody here. But I was going to say, growing up biracial, back then it was like not very common. And I remember everything being just very hard, instead of like getting, support. I thought, oh, great. I would have like twice of everything, the good stuff of everything. But I think I also had like the bad stuff of everything, like twice. And so I think struggle is something that I've always feel very attached to. But I think, now I can look back and say that struggle has, just like, maybe your parents, had the same thing. But I think struggle, made me who I am today, and really forced me to be in survival mode and figure things out, right? Because, that's what I had to do. But now I'm so thankful for the work, I was a classically trained trumpet player, and there's not a lot of Asian brass players, I think, in this country. And so every step of the way I found like, hey, I really didn't see anybody that looked like me. There were a couple of people, but so that just made it a little bit tough at every step of the way. But now that I'm working with students of diverse backgrounds, I feel so empowered. I feel that that we're all speaking the same language, and it's such a joy to work with, especially with Juliette and Danny, who are working with me in the program. Just there's a certain freedom to do that, to do the work that you can do, and you can see beyond, I guess, face value of what students need, right? And you can provide for that. So that feels very empowering. So I feel like because of that, of my cultural background, I'm able to support a lot of people in different ways.
That's great. Najib, thank you. Thank you for that. I would actually, just before I pass it off to Danny, I might attempt to answer the question myself a little bit and then pass it on to Danny to take us through the next. When I think about my cultural background and how it influences my work in classical music, I end up very much just what I think a lot of us have said already so far, which is just the American kind of experience. My experience is so, we kind of designed our own version of growing up as half Filipino and half Greek and half Irish and the other parts that my father was as well, in the middle of the city as an inner city kid. And, that really was so unlike any of our neighbors or classmates. And so, when at this point in my life, when I think about, well, if I had to go and pull out something really like, Asian and Filipino for me, what is that? What is that piece in classical music on the general sense? And I'm not sure it's very different from what I experience today. But it's a great second part of the question, which is, are there pieces of it that then any of us want to explore further? And I wholeheartedly would love to dive into it. And admittedly, identifying as a Filipino in classical music is a fairly new thing for me. It's something that I think even I've been friends with so many of you guys may not even realize that my background isn't Latina. And so it's not always something that's at the forefront of who I've been professionally. But I just want to throw it out that I want to learn more and think about ways to incorporate it. So.
To your point, Lourdes, I absolutely agree. I think part of this process, especially in the past year with the attacks on Asians rising because of the pandemic and the previous administration inflaming that, there's been the fear of saying, like, but I don't want to admit that I'm Asian, but then also being like, but I think I kind of gotta, because that's what this moment calls. Like, I have to connect with that part of me. I feel like, especially in the past month after the Atlanta murders, it was like I was forced to connect with that part of me. And then so much of the discourse that was happening was just parts of me that were like being laid out bare and that I hadn't even necessarily talked to myself about yet. And it's just like, oh, now it's there. Somebody's written about it in this incredibly eloquent way, but it's hitting me in all these ways that I was just, what, wow, okay, I have to sit with that. And then the thinking also in classical music, I grew up in classical music. I started playing violin when I was 5. I was part of a Chinese school in our community down in South Florida. And we did a lot of like all-state competitions and things like that. And so I was always seeing a lot of other Asian instrumentalists. We were competing against each other. And I feel in a sense that may have made me sort of reject my Asianness in a way of just being like, oh, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be viewed as this way, but then in a competition setting, it's like everything is against you in some way or working for you, and you don't really know which part is like working for you or against. So I feel like I kind of lost that connection with that part of myself for a while. Though I also remember my mom like bringing back arrangements of violin and piano of Chao Tairan, who's the Taiwanese composer, being like, look at this piece, why don't you play this? And I was like, oh, but then that's like so Taiwanese, and like I get made fun of in school for that. I get bullied for that. I don't want to play this. I don't want to connect with that part of me because it hurts me. So honestly, I will admit to everybody that this question came to me because I was asked it during an interview, and my instinct when someone says like, how did your cultural background affect your work as a librarian? I was just like, it doesn't. Like, where, how? But actually, I thought, I sat on it for a little while, and I thought about it a little more and realized that, a lot of it in orchestra librarian work, we have to be very self-sufficient. We have to be very independent. We have to just like go and do the thing and get it done. And I realized that, and you have to look up things for yourself, and you have to just go and do it. And I realized that, like, watching my parents down in South Florida, they had originally immigrated to California to study, and then they went to Florida. And in Florida, I just watched them do their thing. They just did what had to be done. And I realized that, like, I do that in my work now. I just do what has to be done in order to get the music out on the stands to be performed by people. And they were just such hard workers. And I think I really just internalized that watching them. Like, in some ways, like we were saying, Najib, like survival, like just surviving, making it work, making sure everything is in place so your family has what they need in order to succeed. But then I also realized that this in some way has influenced my work with students at Curtis, where we have so many international students. And I think it's absolutely incredible that they move halfway across the planet to a place where they're learning in their second or third language, and in an entirely new culture with entirely new stigmas and dynamics. And it's incredible to me. And I found myself, as I've continued working in academia, becoming more protective of them and trying to look out for them in this particular arena, and saying, if you're struggling to adjust because of this crazy thing you're doing, you got, like, tell me, I'm here for you. Please let me, like, I know I'm Asian American, and but I can speak a little Chinese, and if you just need that for a moment, like, I can help you there. Like, let me be available to you in that sense. So that's kind of where I think being Asian has been like, oh yeah, that's part of it.
That's great. Elaine, thank you for sharing in the background to such a complex question. Helen, go ahead. Yes.
Sorry. I was waiting for this puppy to stop crying, but I think I've given up at this point.
Okay.
As I said, I'm half Chinese, and my mom's side of the family is actually super musical. My mom's mom in Shanghai was a piano teacher and continued to play piano. And taught me actually piano when I was 3 years old, as she was living with me and taking care of me while my parents were at work. And so obviously in that way, that's basically informed all of my work as a classical musician. But I did grow up listening to a lot of Chinese music and watching a lot of Chinese musical performances on television, because part of, I think, obviously when you move to a different country, you miss everything about home. And so my mom would actually pay for the CCTV channels. And a lot of those, the airtime is filled up with like Chinese talent shows and different people singing and dancing and all that sort of stuff. So I was surrounded by that a lot. And I actually really grew to love watching all of that sort of stuff. Even though I guess in some ways it felt like, as a lot of you all have said, that I felt like I needed to reject that part of myself a little bit when I was made fun of for like bringing in that weird Chinese snack to school or something like that. As I've grown older, obviously I've developed a much bigger love for Asian and Chinese culture. And I think I'd love to just explore that a little more. I started working on this Chinese piece. And I've heard about actually Cassie Pilgrim, my classmate from Curtis. She had a recent oboe commission come out by Chen Yi, who's a Chinese composer. And so I've just been really inspired by that, and these types of discussions that we're having, and embracing Chinese music more, and encouraging writing more for the harp and for other musicians and other instruments. So yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents.
That's great, Helen. Thank you. And we send hugs over the airwaves to the little puppy that you're watching. So thank you for contributing as well. Danny, why don't I pass it on to you? It might be a good time to do that.
Okay, great. And actually, I wanted to, Viet reminded me of something as he was talking about as a composer and who he is. Is he an American composer? Is he an Asian American composer? And I just happened to read this article this morning. Many of you might know Stephen Yoon, who is the main actor in the recently released film Minari, and he was the first Asian American actor to be awarded, get a nomination for the Academy Award for Best Actor. And I just wanted to read part of this article, which is, Yoon is nominated for his performance in Minari, and while the performer is honored to break down barriers, he's also worried that being defined only as an Asian American actor comes with its own burdens. As Yoon discussed in a new cover story on Minari published by The Hollywood Reporter, he doesn't so readily accept he's an Asian American actor and not simply an actor. And Yoon doesn't simply, or he seems to not particularly be thrilled about his status as the first Asian American nominee for the Best Actor Oscar. And he says, if I step out of myself and see what that moment might mean beyond just me, he remarks, it's cool that we get to establish new ground and that young Asian American kids can feel like this is possible for them too. But personally, he confesses, I'm just not reactive to it in any direction. He's leery that such a high profile achievement might end up a kind of burden in which people view him as an Asian American actor first and actor second. And it's a really, I found that to be a very profound and a compelling article. So it reminded me, and Viet, as you were talking about that as well. Actually, everything all of you have said, like so much of it has resonated with me. Najib, I mean, you're saying like there aren't many Asian brass players. I mean, in the Philadelphia Orchestra, I counted there 25% of us are Asian. I'm like, Asian proud and representation. But in the winds brass percussion, I'm the sole Asian. Everyone else is the strings, and Juliette can smile. But for myself, my parents were not musicians at all. My dad just had like an office job, regular desk job. My mom was a dressmaker, a seamstress, and like many of you, they worked their butts off. They broke their backs practically just to make do and to provide for us. But my musical background really started. I sang in a boys' choir from age 6, and I know for a fact, yes, that had a huge impact on me because we're already singing Bach back then and Mozart, and I'm sure it's already. I'll use the word cultivating who I might become as a musician someday. But yes, my parents, because they came from Japan originally to Argentina, then to America, there was a sense in them to preserve and protect their heritage. So at home, we had like things displayed, that are Japanese things, and yes, we did have those Japanese snacks and Helen that you were talking about, and I realized for them it was very important to keep what they remember because they're now in a foreign country, they're now in a foreign place, and yet everything else, of course, is new and very American. And my experiences, my brothers and I, we went to all American schools, and so I went to public schools. I was maybe one or two of the only Asians in my public school growing up, and then I went to same with middle school. Maybe there were about 5, not to count who's counting, and then eventually in high school there were a little bit more. But then in high schools, my last 2 years, I entered the Juilliard pre-college division, which was every Saturday, and we got to orchestra. And suddenly, I was like, where are all these Asians from? Where did they all come from? And it was to me like a big eye opener, and which will now bring me to my first question to you guys. But I wanted to segue into this because my parents would sometimes in the background play some old like children's songs or Japanese folk songs, and I can hear them at times, and I can relate to them because I know them, which just makes me think if people in general, they're open to things, and if they're listening to things, and they just have not just an open heart and open ears, but to become familiar with something, then the more you become more, it becomes more relatable, especially from a young age. So I can ask all of you right away, like, how familiar are you with Russia? Like, do you feel like Russia, right? What does Russia mean to you? Do you know a lot about the Russian culture? Maybe yes, maybe not. For me, I don't really know much about Russia at all, but Russian music, I relate to it very much, like Tchaikovsky, Shostakovich. And why is that? Because I've been exposed to it, especially, now for a number of years. And so to me, it is very, it's just something that resonates with me to this day. So I remember one point, my dad, he was coming home, and I don't know why, I happened to pick out this LP that was in this collection. It was Beethoven Symphony No. 2. I just had curiosity and wanted to put it on. I played it. And as he came home, he was like, oh, classical music. And he pats me on his head, which he never does. And he says, good boy. And so it's like, so again, the question really is, what is it about classical music? And by the way, I became a punk rock musician at one point, and I know that to them, that was like my rebellious stage. And they were probably thinking, please make it stop. It was like loud. And we were not a garage band because we had a small, tiny apartment in New York City. So I know it must have been peeling the paint off the walls. But what is it about classical music, which is the question here? The first question is, why classical? Why classical music or classical music or art? And why Western classical music? And what does that even mean? So who would like to take that question first? Don't all jump at once.
I can go, so I think when I was young, I didn't think about it. I think I love music because I love the movies, and I love movie soundtracks, and that's what I wanted to play all the time. And then by chance I learned the trumpet, and all the cool solos on trumpet, right? And my teacher happened to be from the Boston area, so I'm like, oh, cool. And he said, like, well, one day maybe you could go study there. And I never thought about it. And I kind of connected the dots, like John Williams, Boston Pops, it's Boston, and I love Star Wars and Jurassic. I have to go there. Like, so it's that really motivated me to practice. and I did all these other things. I think and I said, I always tell myself, why not? Why is it's not that I don't like other forms of music. I do began to associate myself with Western classical music, just as a means of expression. Danny, like you said, you connected with Shostakovich, same thing I do. I love his symphonies. And it's not that it's an either or thing for me. It's like a yes and. I like Western classical music just as much as I like any other types of music. And it was a great way for me to find that source of that medium of expression. And I think the other part of it is that I got to know more people, and I love making friends. And classical music at that time, just provided me. It was like a fairy tale. I don't know if you had this experience, but when no one could have told me that, well, if you learn classical music, you would travel all over the world. You would go to different parts of Asia, different parts of Europe, different parts of America, and see all these cultures and, get to know all these things. But at that time, when you're a kid, you learn all those things in band, right? In orchestra. I played, Japanese folk song, Korean folk songs, and I play, African music and movie soundtracks and jazz and all those things. So it's like the whole world in your band room. And then when you discover that, and the first time I went on tour with the youth orchestra, I think we went to Australia. I think that was the first place that we went. I was like, oh my God, like there's so much out there that you can learn. And there's, I'm so fascinated by different cultures. And then we went to Scotland and Europe, and I said, this is amazing. You know, I didn't think about, Western classical music being, like, elitist or anything like that. I just wanted to make new friends and experience new cultures. And I think that, I'm still a kid when I watch the Philadelphia Orchestra play. When a new movie comes out, a new composition, I'm still that kid who wants to get to know other people. So that's my story.
I love that. So beautifully said. Yeah, it's funny because I mean, I know I was just talking about Viet a moment ago being like an Asian American composer, and Stephen Yun, an Asian American actor. But for us, I mean, are we Asian American musicians, like as performers, not even the creators, like a composer, but like Juliette and Helen? I mean, do you relate yourself as in terms of performing and as a performer? Are you an Asian American, and how different is that than just being a musician, if at all?
That question, I've been asked that question since I was little. Are you Asian? Well, I remember being asked, are you Korean Canadian or Canadian Korean? I was like, I don't know, I'm 12. Do I need to parse that difference? And what does that mean? And it means something kind of different for me, depending on where I am, how I'm feeling that day, what I had for lunch. If I'm I think it's a question of putting a label on what my identity feels like that day. And if I hung out with a bunch of Asian people in Asia and had like kimchi jjigae and, and we're on tour, and then I feel like, yeah, I'm Asian American. And then if I'm, in a different circumstance, it just has very little meaning to put a name to it or anything. But I like how we're talking about music as kind of a global passport to the world. Even if you don't end up going to any of those places, I do feel as much a citizen of Western classical music. I feel like yeah, I know stuff about 18th century Germany. I'm a violinist, of course I do. I'm an expert. Far more than I do about my great grandparents, time I'm going back to like the sense of my musical family is not limited at all by what I look like or where my heritage lies. My musical heritage is well defined, and it is very limited. I see that now, that classical music is a small subset of all the kinds of music out there, and that's exciting and intimidating and a little bit like scary. But I just want to say, like, when you were talking about Russia, and yeah, I think I know Russian music too. So therefore I know Russia. It's like this, the joke about this dog who gets a part in a play, and his friend says, "Oh, what play are you in?" And the dog says, "Well, I'm in Hamlet." And his friend says, "Oh, what's Hamlet about?" And he said, well, see, there's this dog. And that's a little bit how I assume my understanding of Western culture is through music. It's through that, lens of like Tchaikovsky's here and everything else is like, in the distance, like Stalin and the SARS. But yeah, that's where I am. Sorry to ramble.
Helen, I'm going to let you speak in 1 second because I see you're trying to unmute yourself. But, Juliette, as you're talking about Tchaikovsky, I've had the honor and the privilege to happen to serve on the audition committee for when Juliette won her position. She didn't pay me to say this, and I'm not trying to butter up to her. She's not mad at me for anything, I don't think. But the main thing is that, it's behind a screen. I remember in the finals, and she played Tchaikovsky. And not 1 second do any of us think, oh, that sounds Asian Canadian, or that sounds, Canadian Korean. And that's the beauty about art. That's the beauty about all of this. And I just wanted to say that because as you're talking about your heritage, you're talking about who you are, your identity, but you're also talking about Tchaikovsky. And so I wanted to throw that in. Okay, Helen.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I guess I never really considered myself or even tried to define myself as Asian American. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I look white, but that obviously sends me down like a identity crisis, as I was talking earlier before this broadcast started. But yeah, looking white and being assumed as white is definitely an interesting experience. And having an imposter syndrome of you even saying, "Oh, you're an Asian American musician." I'm like, well, I guess I am, but I don't have the Asian American experience that many of you have as well. So feeling like in some ways I can't relate and in some ways can is weird, and it's something that I'm kind of examining for myself, especially now through all of these heightened racial unrest issues that we're dealing with. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on that.
Lourdes?
Yeah, thanks, Danny. I, as we are in our conversation and we've all contributed, I just want to take a moment and kind of part the airwaves and just name the fact that, I think for us in our Asian heritage, the fact that we can choose to assimilate or erase or not as Asians, it is an incredible privilege for us. And I think it's important. I feel the need to name that. When I think in comparison to our Black brothers and sisters and brown brothers and sisters, they don't have this privilege. And I just want to call that out because, you know, it's a choice that we make. I certainly make at times, like, how much is it part of me here? How much is it part of me there? You know, when the screen is up, Danny, you're right, it's anonymous, but the screen comes down, and what are the effects for our colleagues that are of color, darker color than we are? Certainly could be different than our experiences. And I just want to name that here because I think it's important kind of dialogue that that makes our experience also very specific in ways to each other. And our struggles are similar, but also really different. So thanks for letting me just make space for that.
Thank you so much for saying that, Lourdes. That's such a necessary thing to name, and I really appreciate you saying that. And I just want to offer Helen that, you know, anytime you want to speak to your Asian American side, if you want to talk, you know, ever, I'm here for you. Let's do it. I mean, I totally just, it's so strange because I feel like sometimes, like Lourdes said, when is it working to our advantage? When is it not? You know, we have the ability to go in and out, but then at sometimes I honestly haven't thought of myself a lot. And I look pretty Asian. And I see this face in the mirror like every day, but somehow it still doesn't strike me sometimes that like I'm Asian American. And being in a lot of rallies and gatherings lately with the Asian American community, I feel like, oh, wow, yeah, like you're all here. But, you know, in Chinese school growing up, I was bullied by my Asian American counterparts as well. And so I wasn't feeling particularly kindly towards them either. I didn't necessarily feel a place of belonging. And so honestly, in some ways related to the question that Danny, you asked is, you know, the place where I felt like I belonged was in orchestra, was in talking to band students. I could talk music with anyone else. And I listened to a lot of music. So I was really good at just naming pieces and, you know, singing Italian lyrics, even though I didn't know what they meant. You know, I listened to a lot of opera as a kid. Like, who listens to the Magic Flute on repeat all the time as a kid? Apparently I did, my parents say. And so it was a place of community. It was a place I felt accepted in some way, not that it was complete without drama, but then I don't think that necessarily helped me feel particularly Asian either. So I'm for myself, I know I'm trying to just say, yeah, you're an Asian American orchestra librarian and violinist. Like, get used to it, embrace it, and be that. Whatever that means to me. You know, I'm still figuring it out for sure. But I also noticed this thing about myself, though, that is, even though I said earlier, you know, my mom brought back Taiwanese music to be played on a violin, and I did play it, and it felt good. There was something about engaging with music of Taiwanese heritage that, like, it feels good, and I don't understand necessarily what that is. I know when I see those orchestras that are made up of like traditional Taiwanese or Chinese instruments, I'm like, there's a part of me that feels it, even if I didn't necessarily hear it all the time. I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's from like hearing it in the background of like CCTV or dramas or, you know, Chinese opera or something like that. But I feel like there's just like a part of me inside that like awakens and says, yes, you are part of this as well, even if I don't play that instrument. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there as well and saying, yeah, Helen, like, I'm here for you.
That's so nice for you to say and for us to hear. I mentioned my parents who played a little, sometimes in the background music of the, you know, Japan and folk songs, but you know they also did play sometimes in the background. You know, I would hear dee da 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 dee da da, like a record of all the, you know, the classics and Fur-Elise and Mozart, Eine kleine Nachtmusik, that kind of the really popular stuff. And it made me think too about what when Viet said, you know, his parents were just like trying to fit in and blend in and simulation. I wonder about like how much of it is really that our Asian parents or Asian elders, you know, a lot of it is they're trying to to blend in and fit in. So let's adopt these Westernisms, Western culture, Western art, and something very powerful what Lourdes just said, which is, our Black and brown brothers and sisters do not have that privilege because they were never really they've never been given the open door, we can call it that, the open doorness to have the choice. They've often been shut out. And Viet, not to put this on your shoulders, but and this is a really hard conversation to have, but what I love, I'm so impressed because I feel like 400 years of all this constant marginalization, that's an understatement, for the Black communities, but they had to find a way to make their own art and make their own culture within America. So, and whether it's from Africa or Jamaica or from whatever respective continent or country, there was something very American born about, we can call it Black culture, which is something that, we all love. Jazz, hip hop, rap, we can keep going on and on. And it's not even just within music, but what is it? Do we have anything, Asian Americans, that was born here, that's ours? I know it's a really hard conversation, and yet you happen to be the composer. So I'm gonna ask you this, what is it, what is it that's really ours? And I'm not talking about California roll, that was born here, and I'm not trying to make, light of this, but we brought over, yes, cuisine, yes, there's Japanese food, Korean food, Chinese food, of course, but what was born here, like our Black, brothers and sisters, that's, I'm just so amazed that they were able to do this, because they almost have no choice. So in a way, it's classical music, and it's a really big thing to say, and it's not a blanket statement, I don't mean this, but is it, part of it was anti-whiteness for them? And is, for Asians, it's trying to be more white? That's my question. Viet, go.
Yeah, wow. This is something I've thought a lot about lately. I don't think I have a definitive answer or anything, but yeah, I think I like thinking about why classical music is a big part of Asian American culture. I think some of it has to do with wanting to assimilate and wanting to, show that, oh, we can do it too. And look, we're Americans, we can play your music. And I think also some of it has to do with the big emphasis placed on education, and how, because classical music is the music that's taught in schools and music conservatories and things that one might call legit, which I think is kind of problematic for obvious reasons, but it's oh, well, that's what's taught in school, so it must be what is, most worthy of being learned. And I do think that maybe as Asian American culture, it kind of lost a little bit in trying so hard to assimilate. And I honestly wouldn't really know what to say. You say food, and that's sort of more evident and apparent stuff, but I think it is maybe deeper as well. When I said the influence of being an Asian American artist, it's on my music, it's deeper than just something that maybe you hear on the surface. Asian American culture is about kind of the assimilation, or also things that our parents valued, respect for our elders and good grades and all that sort of stuff that is kind of the stereotypical stuff that, you know, an Asian parent cares a lot about. I think it's deeper than than something just that you can label, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes me want to say, like, right? Like, what again? What is it that was born here by us? And it's not like we haven't been around as long, right? And I shouldn't have said like anti-whiteness. Again, a lot of the times, the Black communities had no choice. They were shut out. They were silenced over and over and over and over again. And I get like, yeah, I get choked up just to think about it. And I'm not Black, so I can only imagine. And so when we think about, and the Black culture is so rich and it's so beautiful, and it's like makes me so proud that, you know, that was born here in America, and makes me think like, okay, well, like maybe we should also be inspired to do that. And then on the other end, in the classical music world, which is our discussion here today, is you know, someone asked a question like, does it really make a difference for a young Black musician to see, you know, from a New York public school, to see Anthony McGill, the only sole, you know, Black musician in the entire New York Philharmonic Orchestra? Absolutely, it makes a difference. Absolutely, it makes a difference. And I know there are some people who might question that, like, well, I don't know if that'll really, or it might be the opposite. It might like, well, I don't see many people like me, so I'm not going to go into it. But I think even one makes all the difference. And be that said, I thank you, Seiji Ozawa. Thank you, Yo-Yo Ma, also for paving the way for us.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit to that. Actually, it's, I think another reason why there's such good representation of Asian people in classical music is it's one that was like born of seeing each other as young kids, going to the orchestra and seeing other Asians in the orchestra. And there's a reason also why we don't see many Asian, I mean, there's several reasons, but a big reason why we don't see a lot of Asian representation in more like mainstream media is because there isn't any to begin with. If you asked a random person walking down the street to name 5 household Asian Americans, most people wouldn't be able to. They would say Jackie Chan, Lucy Liu, and trail off and walk away. And so, like, if just my own experience, like, you know, growing up, I never saw any Asian people on TV. And when I did, it was a punchline. So why would I feel welcome, you know, to want to be an actor or something if it just seemed like it wasn't possible? But with classical music, like going to, like Elaine said, going to like an all-state audition, you feel like welcome. And so when I think like representation absolutely matters, especially for just like young musicians who like feel like anything is possible. And you want to keep that spirit alive.
I love that. Yeah, so well said, as Lourdes is applauding, and we all are. And and speaking of Lourdes, I mean, I love how you push us and challenge us, as you always do, so compassionately. And Viet, as you talked about Jackie Chan, and it's funny because, you know, for those of you, and again, this is a hard, vulnerable conversation for all of us, but for some of you who might say, oh, Asian racism doesn't really exist, I've been called Jackie Chan often, you know, from classmates growing up, from people just on the street. And you know, that's not the worst of it, but we don't need to get there. But just in terms of like, this is real. And then this whole other thing in the news these days is why, speaking of the media, where a lot of these incidents are not really being reported and or expressed in the media outlets, well, you know, across the country. And we can talk about that a little bit in terms of invisibility and what is it about that? Why are we the real, are we the invisible other? And is it just because we are the other? It's a big one to take. Lourdes.
I mean, I've been struck by how much it resonates to hear other people's experience of the thought of keeping quiet, the Asian mentality of blending in and just not calling attention to yourself other than getting the A's on the report card. But even then, it's a quiet, you don't tell other people about the A's. And I think that's something that is changing now. I see, first of all, so much more pride in every kind of identity one has. I see also just more mainstreaming of Asian culture. When my kids play video games and they have a whole series of Asian sounding names in their characters, and I think back and like when I was little, it wasn't cool to be named Hyunja, and now they're naming all their NPCs, and seeing characters on TV, which is such a powerful medium, and movies and pop music and BTS, and it's so I do feel that there's a big change in my kids' generation of the concept that Asians are mainstream, Asians are American, and our culture is everyone's culture, so but yeah, there was definitely a generation, like my parents' generation, and a feeling of just like keeping quiet, and maybe it's a response to seeing how our Black and brown sisters have been treated, just like to stay under the radar of being pushed to be more white, or or something different, to be something American that's not multicultural, to be a narrow view of what American is.
Thank you for that, Juliette. Lourdes.
Yeah, I would just kind of footnote a little bit about what Juliette said. I think your question, Danny, was a little bit about being invisible. Again, I would just emphasize that we choose to be invisible sometimes, and sometimes, I think mostly we do. We've already talked about why that is. But I also think that, the ability to do that, is a demonstration into sort of an all-inclusive culture. To go back to an earlier question, what have we made in this country? What do the Asians have to show for the time we've come and been here? And I keep thinking that it's sort of an inclusive culture. It's we design our own culture, our own experiences for our own families. And that's, we have a privilege to be able to do that. And we're good for it. We're richer. We're richer to take in what we want and what enriches ourselves and our families. And I just throw out, when I think about our white brothers and sisters who may be hesitant to share in the openness of other cultures, that it's okay to do it. It enriches us as Asians. I think sometimes we can draw upon so many things that are American. We ourselves are American. So we make up the word America, and we make up the culture here. We are the culture. And, it's just sort of a demonstration that, again, as we know, we believe in this work, that the more depth, the richer, the more representative of humanity. And I think the Asian culture, the American Asian culture, is a great testimony to the failures, the successes, the many depths of that kind of inclusion. And we can hold on to our Filipino lumpia and still enjoy, anything else. And it's great. It's fine. We're okay. Nobody got threatened. Nobody got hurt. It makes us richer.
Yeah, amen to that. I always think of, as you said all of that, like the American experience is really, we're a melting pot. So maybe I'll just call myself from now on a melting potian. That'll be, instead of an American, I'm a melting Potian. So the next question, which is another great one, is how do you think we can better connect with other musicians from underrepresented and or marginalized communities, especially when we are so often pitted against each other? Who would like to go first? Helen.
Yeah, I've actually had some experience with this with my nonprofit. But before that, I think slashing the model minority myth, which I think is something that kind of hasn't been said yet, but has been mentioned quite a bit. And of course, the other stereotypes aimed to pit us, against each other. The model minority myth is in a lot of ways detrimental, not only to us, but to all of our other races, friends, brothers and sisters, because it gives people an excuse or a reason for why we are the way we are. And we should just be all our own individual selves and celebrate our own individualities and our own successes and failures, and making our failures and making what we're not good at along with what we are good at makes us us. So celebrating that, I think, is really important. And then just drawing upon what I was mentioning before, at the Lyra Society, what we do partially is we do presentations in schools. And so we talk about, the harp, it has 47 strings, blah, blah, blah. It's from Ireland, and it has a bow and all this sort of stuff. But the part where the kids get the most fascinated is when we play that song by Drake, or that song that from, pop culture, hip hop. And because those kids are surrounded by that, and they're not surrounded by classical music every single day, that's what they connect to. And so simply by reaching out and learning another culture, learning another, piece of music, because like, as we've said, music is a universal language, and express, our interests, express interest in other people's interests, we can connect that way. Because, people are afraid and can cast aside, what is unfamiliar to them. But if we can somehow make that familiar, and, play it in their language, as we could try to say, I think that's a great way to kind of connect with people a lot better.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Helen. Anyone else have anything to add to that with this question? Yeah, so I like this concept of well, I shouldn't say I like this concept. I know Juliette was talking about, like, we just want to get good A's on our report cards, and and I love what you just said, Helen, that it is the model minority and the myth behind it. And I think the good grades just happened to coincide with the blending in and the assimilation, and that's all, and it has to also coincide with what Lourdes said as well. Like, at all costs, we want to avoid confrontation, and Viet saying, like, we want to keep our noses down, and which brings me to this concept of conformity. Like, is that really what we do a lot of the times? And how do we break away from that? Because really, if we want to think about the real true American way, is to be able to express who you are and express your voice and your unique voice, and not just be like, everyone else. So anyway, I'm gonna let that was just my own sort of add in there. So Lourdes, do you want to ask the next question?
Danny, would you mind if I
please
add a little bit more to what you said?
Thank you.
I think that, as an Asian person, to be in a vulnerable place is not very, familiar to me, at least to me. And I think we're all musicians. We're taught to practice something, and I think we're just practice not being vulnerable. And And part of that is also when you want to be vulnerable, you assume a certain risk, right? And so you do all sorts of risk assessments in your head. Should I say this? Should I not? And I think some of that is you might get pushback from the others, but you also might get pushback from your own family or your own community. And, and sometimes that might not be worth it for, a lot of people who don't have so much capital that they can lose some of it, or don't have capital at all, and they don't want to lose anything, so they're kind of stuck in that middle position. I feel kind of liberated because I left a lot of people to come over here, and in that sense, I like you said, how certain communities had to build their own identity when they come here. I felt like I had to I had the freedom to do that, and I feel that as a community we can foster that. It will take some time, but I think if we keep practicing this, someday we'll I feel like we will get there. So that, I just wanted to chime in on what you said.
Thank you so much, Najib. That's so powerful. And it goes hand in hand also with what Lourdes was saying too. It's like, it's our choice. Like, it's your choice to blend in, or your choice to be different and be yourself, be your authentic individual self. And it's a really great thing to think about. Yeah, it really is in this world. Anyway, Lourdes.
Yeah, I'll just add right there, Danny, I think it's also a significant difference for the Asian American experience compared to the African American experience, where, we weren't stolen from our lands and enslaved here. Our relatives chose to come here and chose to integrate. And so, we weren't yearning for our culture back home. Maybe we were, and certainly Asians do and were, but just a really sort of different kind of connection to our ancestors and where they were from and how they felt, about being in this country. I think just thinking about some questions, I don't know that we've covered it, but I think we might have some students and some young musicians that are tuning in today, and we're appreciative for them always. They keep us always fresh and thinking. So I wanted to pose a question to the group. Maybe some words of wisdom, some thoughts to encourage our colleagues, our Asian American colleagues in particular. How can we encourage our young colleagues to speak out, to find places to do so that feel comfortable for them? And are there things that we think of that we could provide guidance to, or continue to think about moving forward even after today? I don't think we've asked that question yet, so I throw it out to the group.
If I may, I think part of speaking up and reacting to situations that are negative, especially towards you, you have to think about how it'll be seen, and what the consequences are after that, of course. And so I think reacting less emotionally and more deliberately as you face racism and discrimination, whatever color, gender, whatever it may be, taking that second and really thinking about how can I make this situation better or less bad, and outsmarting and outmaneuvering people. Most racism and anger towards other people comes from emotion and from anger, frustration, and if there's a way for you to turn that around in some way, it can really, you know, change the whole narrative for yourself and for people who, you know, would hopefully want to learn more about you and, you know, assume less. So it's my 2 cents.
Helen, thank you for that. I know, Juliette, you want to add to that. I would also encourage as a footnote that great advice to take out the emotion at that moment, but put it back in when you find an ally, right? To help you kind of like light a fire about something. And how could you know, how could a young person identify a group or another colleague, you know, and be able to sort of let off that steam and then leverage it in a way that can be advancing and moving forward. So Juliette, go ahead.
I just wanted to say I loved what you said, Helen, about racism or otherness coming from a fear or frustration, and to see those times as a chance to, you know, make a teachable moment or something, or to represent always the best side of yourself as an individual. You know, I think that the way for me to come out of incidents of, you know, of where I feel like somebody's trying to make me a victim, or is to say that's inadvertent on their part. That's coming out of fear, ignorance, and stuff that I can help with. So finding a way to serve that person or situation in a way, like exactly like you said, coming out of it better, for like a win-win for everybody involved.
Yeah, Juliette, thank you for sure. Danny, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, I mean, I couldn't agree more with my friends here. We sometimes or often think it's on them, you know, them, and we can talk about even, again, recent events in the news, like them, the people who pull citizens over and do what they do, or do what they do sometimes without thinking, or them, the people who get pulled over, and or them, that other race, them, that other gender, them, that other group, that other state, that other city, that other community, them, the other. And, you know, it's not on them. It's really, and I know all of you know this, it's up to all of us. And that's how it can get better. That's how we get better. That's how we stop this broken record that's on repeat, and these videos from repeating and boomeranging in real life. It's always like we think us and them, us and them, us and them, whichever side we're on, and there's never a solution that doesn't begin with we, you know, we the people, and that's all we have. If we give up on one another, then that's it. And you know, Lourdes, you mentioned about being a better ally. I've never watched this show, New Amsterdam. I guess it's a show on, maybe it's on NBC. But it's for those of you who happen to have Hulu, they show all the episodes, and I happened to watch just one episode, season 3, episode 6, New Amsterdam, season 3, episode 6. Write it down. Yes, thanks, Elaine. And it is so powerful because it really talks about systemic racism, but it's not like preachy. It's not about like, you know, you need to do this, you need to do this, but it's so powerful because the message really is about listening. And that's all really, I think that's the best thing. It's not just, I think we all know this, that listening is really what makes us grow, what makes me learn, what makes me evolve is by listening. I think that's in terms of like advice to especially the young people out there, being better listeners and active listeners. Those are my thoughts.
Danny, thank you. Now, Najib, go ahead.
Yep. So yeah, Danny, I completely agree about starting with the self, right? And I don't know about you, but I feel like sometimes I get more and more triggered by things because they keep happening so quickly and so often with social media and all these things. And I guess, you know, I don't know where I heard this from or learned about this, but a trigger can only create an explosion if there's ammunition. And if you remove that ammunition, like that trigger is ineffective. And it's, it made me realize, like, what am I carrying around that has me so, explode a lot of the times? And how do I remove those things, right? Or better yet, how do I understand someone else? What are they carrying? And how I can avoid creating situations that might trigger an explosion. So that really has gotten me to think about, how we should create environments where we can safely remove our ammunitions, by getting to know each other, by getting to know ourselves more, but also by learning about the things that created explosions in the past, like, Vincent Chin and, the riots in California and all those things, right? So what were those things and how do I avoid those things right now? So it's been a great learning process for me.
Yeah, same, Najib. Thank you. Helen, did you want to go?
Yeah, you were talking about how we can, help be the change too. And I think, despite kind of what we've talked about with our families and ancestors about keeping quiet, is quietly, coming into more leadership positions and working towards being, just more visible and inspiring, our young ones to do the same. And also, like, you kind of want to be the change, you want to affect those things, and being inspired and motivated to one day be the president of Curtis, or something like that. You can be the change that way and inspire people further that way as well. So I wanted to add that.
Helen, I wanted to share a great James Baldwin quote after what you said. He said, "Children have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they've never failed to imitate them." And I thought, what you said was just resonate. We have to lead by example.
Yeah, great quote. Yeah, go ahead.
Just say something just to add. I think really great stuff that everyone's saying, but just I think for like young Asians coming up in the world today, like it's like the culture that Asians have is so beautiful, and we should embrace that, but also embrace who you as an individual are, because we have our broad culture and then like all these like things like stereotypes and the model minority myth that come along with them, but you're still you're your own unique self. And the best thing that I think all of us can do is be unapologetically ourselves and show that we are all unique and we all have something different to say, and that's a really beautiful thing. Like I was asked yesterday, like, do you consider yourself more of an introvert or extrovert? And I think that's changed a lot for me as I've gotten older, because I think when I was younger, I did kind of, for different reasons, but I was an introvert. And I think I was feeding into this idea of what society told me that an Asian like man should be. And I didn't so I was very quiet. I didn't speak up for anything. I just went with the flow. But as I've gotten older, I've like kind of discovered who I am, and I'm not that person. Like I'm a lot more extrovert than I ever thought I was. And it's just kind of been this like lifelong journey, as it is for many people, to discover who you are. But when you do discover it, and as you discover it, just embrace it and show the world who you are.
Beautiful. An applause for sure, Viet. It's so great to see the puppy, Helen. So adorable. You've been great over there. I would just add a comment, then I want to pass it to Danny to kind of lead us in another direction. When I'm thinking about students and young folks, and just what may be going in their minds. I would just, my addition here is that, I think that not only do we as Asian Americans share in our experiences with each other, but I would encourage us and our young colleagues to share in the actual power that we have, the fact that we can make these choices. That's amazingly powerful, and I would encourage our young folks to continue to use that power that's very real in distributing the weight in terms of dismantling racism for our darker colored folks. Because again, just back to allyship, power is a key part of racism, and for us to undo it and dismantle it, I think we hold a special place in being able to navigate certain places and really help carry and distribute the weight, so that the weight doesn't have to just fall on certain folks and certain people. And we have a struggle that's our own, but we also can leverage it in a way that helps advance this work to someday dismantle racism. I really do optimistically hold out for that day someday, and I'm encouraged. So any comments on that? Otherwise, Danny, take it away.
I'm encouraged as well. Thank you, Lourdes. And, Najib and Helen, talking about how the younger people who, they may not listen to us, but they mirror us or imitate us. And I have two daughters, and do they listen to me? No. But often is the case. Like sometimes I wonder, and I don't mean this at all like a pat on the back, but it's like they often do really imitate a lot of like the things I care about. Like they are very vocal about social justices, and I'm like very proud of them for that. So things like that. So yes, it's very powerful, and vice versa. My kids teach me a lot, and so I want to encourage all of you youngsters out there. One time years ago, it's no longer, thankfully, but one of my parents said something borderline racist, and I kind of decided I'm going to call them out on it. And I just said, no, that's not, you're not supposed to say that, and that's not good, and that's not cool. And then, and it's we can call it anti-Asian, to push back and to be disobedient and to be, it's like we're supposed to, again, just nod and do the work. But I encourage all of you, like equally, speak up to the elders. If you think or feel, whether it's something you believe in, then yeah, do it. You have the green light, you have, the license to do so. So the next question, and also before I get into this next question, as we wrap things up, and I know Juliette has 5 minutes with us because she has to run off a little bit early. But for those of you listening, feel free to type in questions as well. You can go ahead and start doing so. I can't see it, we can't see it, but I guess we have someone who's the tech person. So so many of the people in this call here are in leadership positions. Where do you find that being AAPI informs, challenges, or maybe has been an obstacle in your work in these roles?
I'll jump in and invite others. For me, I think that my experiences have been just the expectation that I'm familiar and invested in this work, and of course I am. But they're my previous experiences, and my current to some degree, place great confidence that as a person of color, AAPI specifically, that I'm well versed in all of this, and I'm certainly not. I make mistakes along the way, and I invite others to make mistakes with me. But at the same time, there has in my professional experiences, there is an expectation that I'll serve on this committee or provide some background on this topic that relates to anti-racism. What does Lourdes think, and what's this language? What should it be? So and I think I'm more comfortable with that nowadays, but that, whether it's good or bad, it's a reality for me.
Thank you, Lourdes. Anyone else? And I know, in particular, yeah, Najib and Helen, you are equally like directors, and Lourdes was recently named the executive director of Astral Artists. But Najib, sorry, you were going to take over. Yes, please.
I think on the bad side is that because, I'm in so many committees in the name of diversity, it seems like I'm supposed to be an expert in so many different things, right? And, I don't mind because I'm very passionate about the work, but, sometimes that just takes a lot out of you. And sometimes you're the only one in there, and you can't really bounce certain things off the wall, and or it takes a long time, and it takes a sustained effort to move something. So I think that's one of the challenges for in my experience, is that you want to see the change, and you have to actively be participating in the change. um, I I think that on the other hand, I think that um, it's been great because I understand the level of different things like microaggressions and those things that may affect the outcome. For example, I'm as we talk about actors and all that, like I'm very focused on developing great musicians, right? And not great Black musicians or great Latinx musicians, but great musicians just across the board. And I feel like maybe sometimes that is not clear, or that there's a stigma, associated with, well, they're good Asian musicians or good Black musicians or whatever. And I just want to have develop great musicians, but also understanding where the barriers and hurdle lies for each student. That's the underneath part, right? So I think I think that's where color blindness come in, and it got like kind of muddled. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. So I think that's how I see it, and I want to invite people to see it the same way, so that we could, look at it from not a deficit model, right? Not a deficit lens, but more of like, how can we empower our students with the same expectations, and provide them with the equity to do the things that they want to do. So that's how I see it.
Thank you, and thank you, Juliette. I see that's your cue to not what Najib said, but the time is your cue. Thank you for joining us, Juliette. Yes, Elaine.
Oh, Danny, I was going to ask you if you've, as a principal of a section, do you find anything that you relate to in leadership and its relationship to?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question just in terms of that the role. I've never really felt personally marginalized per se, but I will be honest, there are times whether it has to do with being Asian American or not, I think we all have our issues, or we all have our incidences and experiences, and sometimes I definitely do feel invisible, and I cannot help but to sometimes even just ask, and it's not a healthy question. Is like, oh, would this be the same if I was a white male? I know it's a hard question to ask. And sometimes I actually feel like the answer would be no, it wouldn't be the same. I think it would be different. And so then but is that fair? And is that a fair thing to even say with regards to, and I'm not saying like white males have it all and that they have it easy. That's certainly not a way out. But in terms of like, I love what Laura said too about like, we learn from our incidences and experiences, but we also learn from our own mistakes. And yes, absolutely, we grow from them. And for those of you, if you've ever felt along the way, whether you've been marginalized or someone stepped on you for any reason, just instead of playing a victim, not that you would, but just to think what you can really grow from that and learn from that. And I think that's a really good tool. I think the great leaders in the world, not a section leader, but like the leaders in the world, are those, again, who are listeners and those who are open to listening to other people and having empathy. If we had that, then there would definitely be world peace. Absolutely. But thank you, Elaine, for that.
Sorry, just poking you there. Yeah, I mean, I felt like that was just such an interesting perspective you could offer as a section leader amongst directors and the composer who's writing the things that we perform. I know for myself, being an orchestra librarian isn't necessarily a designated leadership position, but I know for myself that I worry a lot that as someone who's very East Asian appearing, that in my role, I give people what they need. When they ask for something, I give it to them. And I'm always a little afraid that somehow I might be unfortunately playing into the stereotype of like the submissive and like obedient Asian person. And like, oh yeah, you asked the Asian girl for a thing and she gave it to you without, any fuss. And it's like, but I'm also a person and I get mad at you, just not to your face probably. So, I could put spiders in your folder if I want to. Like, let's just be careful of that, shall we? This has been amazing. We're doing such great time as well. I think we have time for a question or two. And so we have this fabulous question from Makai on Facebook.
Wait, Elaine, can I just say a quick thing before you say that? Is the opposite holds true, is that when we are often obedient and polite and kind. Like, I mean, that's what sometimes at least people perceive me to be at times. But the problem is, here lies the problem, is when I do speak out, suddenly I'm aggressive. Suddenly I'm not a good guy anymore. And I find that to be this awful double standard that I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels this way. So for those listening, again, how do you deal with that? I still encourage you to practice the art of expressing yourself, obviously not in a aggressive manner, but that doesn't mean to hold it within. It doesn't mean to just, there's a saying, I want to say it in Japanese, but it's just like basically keeping everything internalized. And I encourage you not to do that. Okay, Elaine, go.
Okay, thank you. Can you say it in Japanese? So curious. Okay, you don't have to.
It's funny, it's actually, the word is gaman, which has a few different meanings, but in a direct translation of gaman means patience, but another word for gaman is like withhold. It's just like gaman shite means like you need to hold it in. You need to don't put it out, don't let it out, hold it in, keep it in.
That's so cool. Thank you for sharing that. So yeah, with our last couple of minutes, we have a question from Makai who asks, could you speak on the experience of navigating career and life with the lack of education on the history of discrimination towards the AAPI community within our current education systems? I feel too prevalent in the American consciousness that when people think of racism, they immediately think of slavery without considering the long history of anti-Asian American Pacific Islander legislation, structural racism, etc.
I would just throw a quick answer out to Makai and thank Makai for that awesome question and thinking there. The thing that comes to mind for me is that when I think about Asian oppression and history in the US, I do couple it with reparations that have been made. And so, is that a reason that maybe people consider it, oh, it's solved, okay, let's move on. Whereas for slavery, we're just getting a commission together to kind of look at this. So I have to ask, I don't have really the answer, but I appreciate the thought from Makai that, what are the reasons for that? Why not focus more on it? And then let's talk about reparations sometime. But, again, something that can be really powerful from the Asian American community in this overall struggle.
Lourdes, I think you bring up a good point, which is also something that's erased in Asian American history, and something that I think contributes to the discrimination is that the erasure of the relationship that has existed between Asian and Black communities. And then there has been a history of them working in solidarity with each other to accomplish a lot of things, especially, even during the civil rights era. There were a lot of incredible activists doing some amazing work. And it's true, I think in order to learn about them, we kind of have to seek them out on our own. As a librarian, of course, I'm going to advocate everyone, like, do your research. Did you hear something? Did you hear a name? Did you hear a quote? It sounded interesting. Go look who they are up. I mean, it's how I learned about like Yuri Kochiyama and Grace Lee Boggs and just the absolute incredible work that they've done. Helen Zia, I notice I'm naming all women, but there are a lot out there, and there's so many amazing organizations doing this work now. But as Juliette was saying earlier, I feel like there are more and more people speaking out about this and making sure people have heard these names, hear these voices, that we can continue doing this work to make sure we unearth this history that we have to help maybe stem the tide of discrimination that we face a lot.
I also just want to quickly add, I mean, I know I feel like I'm throwing a lot out to the young audience in particular of AAPI nature and background, but along the lines of what we're talking about here is, again, fight your fight, but don't only fight your fight. Absolutely fight for the Black community, and not just anti-Asian racism, but anti-Black racism. We need to, again, help each other. Fight against the marginalization of transgender issues lately in the news. You might think, well, that doesn't relate to me. That doesn't, absolutely it does. We have to not just fight our own fight. I'm not trying to preach here, please don't take it that way, but it's just, I thought maybe it might be nice for, especially the younger people, to hear it from us. Like, again, don't just stand up for yourself. Yes, you should, but also we must stand up for brothers and sisters of humankind. Any other questions, Elaine? If not, we can go back to the list that you so wonderfully thought out.
I'm going to add a comment as Elaine just navigates for a sec.
Right, because I was go ahead.
Yeah. No, and I know we're coming into the end. I would just go back to think about, what are some ways to navigate that tough request to speak out. When I think about my own experiences over my many years of existence, it's really changed over the time, and I would say, depending on my position, whether that's something I'm technically called or an invitation that I'm fulfilling, that determines the extent to which I can speak out. If I'm the only one in a room with a certain view, that also kind of determines the extent and the severity with which I can make a gesture. So in terms of how to put that into some thoughtful encouragement is, I think it's always speak with eloquence and patience, as Danny has taught us a new word of what that could sound like. But eloquence and thoroughness as well, I think is important. It doesn't mean that we don't, I think utilizing emotions to communicate how we want to come across can be useful, but they tend to be limiting because, as we know, that's usually the first thing that people see is, the spitfire that's coming out. So it may not get you the most successful result if you just thinking about offering advice, leaving that aside for a moment, and really trying to be eloquent and respectful of the space that you're in and understand, the context. So just throwing that out there, that I think it's worth kind of thinking through. I try to remind myself all the time, and I'm not very good at it. And it's something I do practice at constantly.
Thank you so much, Lourdes. And for sure, I think that is a part of the other question we were asking about leadership. I think in demonstrating that is a large part of great leadership, as I mean, I personally know that you are, and I've learned so much from that for myself and for my own path forward. Does anyone else have any closing thoughts before we move on into some resources and some acknowledgements? I will throw out really quick, actually, I'm just gonna say, I'll let you go, that next month is Asian American Pacific History Month. So anyone out there who has access to a library or is a librarian, you know, ask your libraries, ask their collections, who are your AAPI or Asian composers in the collections? Are there authority files for standardizing anglicized spellings of Asian names that are like translated from characters so that there's accessibility for people to explore and learn this music? Do you have Asian folk songs or art songs available for people to perform? And, you know, as much as I love Puccini, like Turandot and Madame Butterfly do not count for these things. So explore your collections and like find out what's in there and what you have available for you to learn. Okay, sorry, I'm getting off myself.
I was just gonna say a little bit about what, you know, Lourdes, you said. You know, I don't know if we talked about mentorship, and I think that you know, a really important part of how I was able to develop is through mentors. And you know, just there's so much good advice out there that, you know, and people are so happy to just share their time with you, especially for, you know, just causes like this. So I would really, you know, just encourage every one of you to seek out mentors, not only in the arts, but all sorts of diverse, you know, fields, and understand how we can approach this work holistically. And, you know, even Asians in other fields have different experiences that we might not have, or other peoples of color. And I think, you know, I feel like I'm very blessed that I have mentors from all sorts of, you know, race and ethnicity, and even, you know, young students in college that I ask their opinion, and even, you know, people who are retired, just to, because like I feel like as I get older, I live in history a little bit more. You know, because I think about what I was doing. Oh, I was 20 years old. I was so radical back then. But then, you know, the time moves on, and if you don't, you know, reach out to know what's going on, you know, that you grow with the history, right? And so I think, you know, I think Danny, you mentioned that also, you know, seek the words of the young, and see what are they thinking about. And I think that's important. And as a side note, you know, if you haven't listened to Viet's music, it's amazing. Like, go listen to his music.
It's so good.
It's so good. I just listened to this renewal. That was amazing. You know, and you know, I think about like what is you know, Danny, you were talking about like what is purposefully Asian, you know, could be Asian, is this maybe the idea of composing music that is purposeful, like you know, Viet's doing. It's so, you know, there's a lot of thought behind that composition, I feel like, and it's so relevant for not only musicians but, you know, society. And so I just wanted to, you know, give a shout out to Viet. That was awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with just we all as artists can, like, we shouldn't take for granted that we can start conversations in ways where we open the door for people to voice how they're feeling. And I think that's a really great thing about music, is that we can say something as specific or not specific as we want. But regardless, is we make people feel something, hopefully, if we're doing it right, in my opinion. And so we can actually be the genesis of change with our art. And that's something that is really special with what we do. And I'm look forward to like seeing what all of you do and continue to do with what with the art that you make and the music that you make.
Thank you so much, Viet. I'm gonna do a quick screen share again of just some resources. Here you can see Stop AAPI Hate for reporting Asian hate crimes, bystander intervention training for those who are interested in, the question of what can I do? There are some organizations here listed that you can just explore to support AAPI communities, music research, Philadelphia art communities. And I especially want to point out the links here to the Utopia art series, the director's cut, which inspired our own conversation here today, and the Wear Yellow Proudly AAPI Musicians Initiative. Their Stop Asian Hate benefit concert is on April 27th to benefit the Asian American Federation. So please follow them on social media for the most up-to-date information on the concert broadcast and other ways that you can stay involved. Thank you everyone for joining us here today, all our viewers, everyone writing in the chats, asking us questions. I know there were a lot more questions and I hope we hopefully addressed some of them today. And the ones who did ask, we just appreciate the engagement so much. Thank you again so much to Helen, Juliette, Najib, Viet for just all your generosity and time and spirit and heart, and especially Lourdes and Danny. Thank you for organizing this along with me. We'd also like to thank Amanda Lynn Bottoms and Aaron Crouch for their inspiration and thoughtful advice in placing this together. A huge thank you to Rory Murphy for production assistance, and additional thanks to Drew Schlegel, Dorothy Schrader, Colleen Hood, Stephanie Acosta, Elizabeth Nowland, and Agnes Shea. Everyone, please stay well. Take care. We hope to see you next time.
Thank you, Elaine, as well. I know you don't want to thank yourself when you say that, but thank you, Elaine, so much. And I'm also very happy that you called this section one. So I'm hoping that we will do more of this. These conversations, discussions are so vital. And I'm getting to know, I'm learning so much from this incredible group of people. Najib and Viet in particular, not in particular, but just, talk about underrepresented countries where you come from. It's like, we think about Asia as often Korea, Japan, China, Taiwan, and a lot of classical musicians come from there. But like from, Indonesia or Malaysia or Vietnam, it's rare. And it's just so amazing to see you both here. And it's really great. And again, thank you all. Thank you, Elaine. I'm not trying to wrap it up, but just a reminder, be yourself, express yourself. Don't just cherry pick racial inequalities for your race only, right? It's racial inequalities for all races. And thank you again. Sorry, Elaine, go back.
Oh no, that was it, but thank you. That was a great way to close it out. So yeah, everyone stay safe and take care.